Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey premiered in theaters this summer, and I could not resist illustrating my own version of it. Hi, I'm Kat, and I'm an illustrator. And in this video, I'm going to be walking you through the whole process, what I chose to include and why, and going from the rough sketch to the finished piece. So let's get into it. So here I am doing the rough sketch, which is always the first step in my process, just trying to figure out places to fit all the elements that I want to include in the image. I usually have an idea in my head of what I want this to look like, but just trying to really position those pieces and make sure that it makes sense on the page. I'm also using Adobe Fresco for this project, just wanted to mention that. So as I'm sketching, I want to share some overall thoughts on the movie. I was really intrigued by all of the hype, and every article and meme I saw online was really praising the cinematography. And at that point I was like, okay, I need to watch this movie. But getting tickets for this in the first few weeks of it opening was so difficult. I was shocked by how hard it was. If you're in Toronto and trying to watch this in 70mm, in IMAX 70mm, there was just no way. But I was able to see this in standard IMAX, luckily, and I really enjoyed it. I wouldn't say that it's the best movie I've ever seen or anything, but Christopher Nolan really leaned into that vastness and the scale, the sense that all of these characters are so small against the enormous world that they're in. And to me that made a lot of sense because the Odyssey is such an epic story, and that's why there's such a massive cast of characters, gods, monsters, kingdoms, and somehow all of it has to move together. So the scale is honestly what pulled me in as a viewer and also what inspired me the most as an illustrator. Super quick break: if you're an artist or if you appreciate this kind of content, let me know by liking this video. And if you want to see more of my work, please follow me on Instagram at herbsvidi, where I'm often turning more movies into drawings or just posting projects that I'm working on. I'm currently working on a series where I'm watching and drawing my way through the New York Times list of best 100 movies of the 21st century. So the link is in my description. Okay, back to it. So when it came to actually illustrating this, I wanted to pull out the moments that stuck out to me the most from the movie, the ones that felt the most visual or the most iconic, and the Trojan Horse was the obvious one. I love the way it looked when it was half submerged on the beach with people pulling it out with rope and it's kind of glistening in the sun. And there's something just very visual and instantly recognizable about this scene. Next, I had to bring in the Cyclops Polyphemus with the sheep and the cheese hanging from the cave, because that scene is such a strange and specific horror to it, and I just love the way he looks kind of peeking out from the cave. Ever since I saw the trailer for the movie and the images of the practical effects they used, I knew I had to include it. And I think this was one of my favorite scenes in the movie, just because it started to involve more of like the fantasy elements, and it's one of the main monsters in the movie that had a pivotal plot line. And I'm not going to say in detail what that means, but we all know the Cyclops and its significance in Greek mythology as the son of Poseidon. I think one difficulty I had here was trying to find good images of the exterior of the cave. There weren't a lot of film stills to pull from, and what I could find on Google wasn't that helpful, but I was eventually able to find a photo of them filming at Nestor's cave with a helicopter, and that gave me a general enough sense of the shape of the opening and how forested or vegetated the area around the cave is. So just below the Cyclops Cave, I wanted to include Penelope and Antinous. I wanted to show them kind of at odds in the kingdom of Ithaca, with her holding the bow. And I also really love the teal dress that Anne Hathaway was wearing at some points in the movie. There was a scene where Penelope is standing with her son at the top of the kingdom with the wind blowing, and I just thought it would be more interesting to have her coupled with Antinous in this setting just because of their dynamic in the film. And I wanted to include another scene where Telemachus, played by Tom Holland, is sword fighting or training with his mentor, and Eumaeus and Argus the dog are kind of sitting on this bench next to them, watching and giving advice. So I chose this scene just because the poses of sparring and combat training is so dynamic in its movement, and I think that would really add to the composition. And it felt appropriate to include all three characters here just because they are interacting in this specific location. And it also felt close enough to the castle that it made sense to place it just below or beside it. I thought the cliff edge created a nice border to round out the scene, and it also ended up using similar colors to the other greenery that I have going on in this area. So it does feel kind of continuous and integrated. The thing with drawing movies, and I was kind of mentioning this earlier, is that you're not always going to find reference images for what you're trying to draw, especially if it's part of a building or a person is cut off and they're never fully shown on screen. And sometimes there aren't really any photos that you can find on Google either. And in this case, I was trying to draw the castle, and you kind of get a mix of different pieces. That's what I'm doing here. It's not meant to be 100% realistic to the film, but it generally reflects the architecture, the columns, the red flag, the materiality of the building, and some of the rocks that are at the base. Okay, now moving on to what I think is my favorite part of the movie, which was the sequence with Circe's hut. And one thing I thought was interesting was how there was human artifacts that were sprinkled along the hillside on the path leading up to her cottage. There were shields and armor, and at one point there was this giant statue of a head buried in the grass, and also a lion and some other unusual animals that added an unexpected element to the scene. So this path that the soldiers are taking up is almost felt like a zigzag shaped route, so I thought that was very visually compelling and gave me something fun to play with compositionally. And having the soldiers kind of walking up along this path and finding these artifacts and animals along the way. So I overall just really love the scale here, and especially the ruins mixed with the grass textures. The hut itself felt very lonely, a bit old and dilapidated stone cottage that was perched at the top of the cliff. And this whole atmosphere I really loved because it at times felt cozy, but at the same time a little bit mysterious and dark at the same time. And I really liked the contrast between those two things. When I was watching the movie, it felt like a dream almost. But at the same time, it slowly became a nightmare. For those who have seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. And I really love that because of the body horror and the witchcraft and the darkness of the scene while it's set on this beautiful island off the coast. So I had to include a group of pigs, obviously, outside of the hut, and also some armor and shields in the grass that have been discarded. So there's a lot of opportunities for little Easter eggs. I think in order to break up all of the grass textures, I had to include small details like that. There was also this very creepy looking stone ruin that had a bunch of like dark openings that I thought was really scary. I was worried a face was going to pop up at some point, but it didn't. But I thought that was also nice to include in this area. As you're watching me draw, you might notice that I'm working in layers, and I'm also coloring things incrementally as I'm drawing each section. And that's just to help me see exactly how everything is coming along in its entirety, because I usually do full line work and then full color afterwards. And in this case, I wanted to try out doing the line work of each section separately on its own layer and then coloring at the same time, just so that I could play around with the overall palette, because sometimes I found myself adding an extra shade of green for a tree that I want to implement into other areas. And it also gives me the satisfaction of feeling like, okay, I completed a full area including color. Sometimes when you spend a lot of time doing detailed line work, you get to a point where you're happy with it, but then you have to start this whole other process of coloring, and sometimes it feels very daunting and a little bit exhausting to do things that way. So I think breaking it down into chunks so that I could take a break from doing line work and just move on to color in stages really helped me in this case. Another thing that I noticed in Adobe Fresco, especially if you're working with vector line work and then trying to color it in afterwards, is that if you have too much detailed line work or too many elements in one layer, it really slows down the processing time and it really lags because it's trying to think through your whole layer at the same time. So I definitely recommend, if you're doing anything detailed, to break it up into not as many layers as you can, as many layers that make sense as you can, just to help speed up the coloring process afterwards. I have been using Adobe Fresco for a couple years now, and I really like it overall. I think that being able to do vector line work and raster at the same time has really improved my future proofing of my projects and the files that I'm working with. I love that I can bring it into Illustrator, but coming from someone that was using Procreate primarily. There are some features in Procreate that I think have an advantage in terms of like isometric grid snapping, and I think their brushes are a little better, but I really do think that kind of the vector component has made a huge difference in my practice, and hopefully in the future I can go a bit deeper into some of the workflows that I have for Fresco, the brushes I use, and kind of techniques for coloring and drawing. But yeah, future videos to come, but overall it's been great for me so far. Okay, moving on to the top section of the illustration, I wanted to group together elements tied to water because I knew that I wanted to put the sunset over the horizon in the background. And there were already a few places or things that fit that theme, with those being the ship sailing, the cliffs, the sirens, the beach with Calypso, and this also felt like a good way to place Troy in the distance, along with some of the other coastal cities that the soldiers were pillaging in their journey. So these are places that I didn't necessarily want to render in a ton of detail, since they're pretty large, and it just made more sense to push them back towards the horizon, if you know what I mean. I also wanted to include the whirlpool and other elements like the snake monster Scylla, and for all of these I tried to connect them compositionally. My advice is to group environments that share something in common. In this case it's water, so you have a natural transition between the different micro environments. So find a connector, whether it's trees, forest, water, or sky, and kind of use that to position elements around it. One criticism from the movie is that I wish they leaned into the monsters a bit more and kind of explored that side of mythology further. And I know that would probably mean more CGI. I know Nolan didn't want to use as much CGI or keep it to a minimum, but I just love creepy, weird monsters. And for example, the snake monster with the multiple heads, like it was on screen for maybe, I don't know, 5 seconds, and I just would have loved a bit more weirdness. Even with the nymphs, like Charlize Theron, who played Calypso, she was great, but she kind of just looked like a normal lady. And I think putting a bit more thought into the characters, or even like reimagining them, would have made it even more interesting to me. I'll leave the rest of the time for the time lapse, but if you watched the movie, let me know what you thought of it. Did you enjoy it? Did you think it was worth the hype? And what do you think of my drawing of it? Yeah, I'd love to know. If you made it this far into the video, thank you so much for watching. This is the final piece, and I had a lot of fun with it. There were definitely a few things that I couldn't include. I obviously couldn't fit in every character and every setting from the movie. I really had to pick and choose what I personally found was the most interesting. And I also set a deadline for myself because I didn't want to spend weeks on this. I wanted it to be a quick exercise while the film was still fresh in mind. But before I zoom in and pan the full drawing, there is still a question I need to answer, which is, where is Odysseus? And when I first posted this on Instagram, I asked people to try and find him because I hid Odysseus somewhere in the drawing, and I thought it would be a cute kind of Where's Waldo kind of activity. So a lot of people clocked it quickly, but he is indeed hidden in the lotus flower on the beach, chilling, and not in a rush to get home at all, clearly. So yeah, thank you again for watching, and if you like this video, you might like my other videos turning movies into drawings.